Good morning. My name is Butch Bateman. I'm on the board of directors for the Heritage Museum of Montgomery County. Today is July the 5th, 2011, and I have the pleasure today to interview my parents. My second mother, Barbara Metcalf Bateman, for the last 20 years, and my father, Morris Bateman, for the last 64 years. We bring you today from a drought that has been in the state of Texas and Conroe and Montgomery County, an extreme drought. We celebrated July 4th and we had no fireworks because it was so dry. So at this time, this is Love of My Life. This is Barbara Bateman, and we're going to talk a little bit about who she is, where she came from, and then we'll speak a little bit with Morris Bateman and do the same thing.
Well,
okay, Barbara. Where were you born?
I was born in Matehuala, Mexico.
When?
San Luis Potosi. July the 12th, 1926.
Okay. And you went from Mexico to where?
Telluride, Colorado. My grandfather had a brewery in Telluride. Telluride beer. It's where my father grew up. And he was a mining engineer, having graduated from Colorado School of Mines. And he was in Mexico working for the American Mining and Smelting Company when I was born. But they were having a revolution down there, and all the churches were closed. So my parents came out of Mexico because my brother was about to go to school, and they wanted him to have a good education. So they came back to Telluride, and Daddy bought a mine over at Ophir, and he mined there until the fall of the price of silver, when it really dropped. And that's when he came to Oklahoma. My uncle had gotten him a job with Shell Oil Company, and that's where Daddy retired from Shell in Canada when Leo and I were married many, many years later. But we came to Conroe in 1944, and I was just out of high school from Perry, Oklahoma, and Daddy was sent here to get the price of oil down. It had gotten to be $1 a barrel to produce. And Daddy was what you called a troubleshooter for Shell. And before he left, 5 or 6 years later, he had gotten the price down to 10 cents a barrel to produce. He had the fields of Conroe and Cleveland and Livingston. And he was just really busy driving all the time between all these fields. And when we came, then they sent me off to Our Lady of the Lake in San Antonio to go to college. And I came back that summer and got a job with Superior Oil Company. And I told Daddy I did not want to go back to school. And he said, well, because I really had a good job. And he said, well, if you want to stay, fine. Anyway, that summer before I got my job, I was working for Judge Strode and Tommy Green as their secretary while she went on vacation.
What year was that, Barbara?
That was 1945. And then that year, like I say, that summer, I went to work for Superior. Lump Warren, who was Judge Pitts's daughter-in-law, got me the job out there with the it was the gas company out there. And then I was there for about 3 or 4 months, and they transferred me to the production office. And I was there to take Mabel Grogan's plot.
Was that in Conroe? The
In
production
Conroe.
office? Okay.
And that spring of 45, well, no, it was, I guess, in the really fall of 45, I met my husband, Leo Metcalf. He was just home from the Navy for a brief leave before he went to California to go to Japan. And then the war was over, so he was discharged. And so we started dating in 45, and we had the best time. You just, everywhere you went, it was fun. We'd go out to the river. Ty Cobb had a restaurant out there, and we'd go to the baseball games. We had a semi-pro team here, and it was just a lot of fun. You'd go to the river of where the Strake Boy Scout camp is now, and it was just, you know, we had the Crichton Theater, and with the country
recall how many
club.
people were in Conroe then? Any guesstimate?
About 5,000. I think
5,000
the population was just about that, 5,000.
And most of the city was around the square?
Oh yeah, you had shops everywhere. We had 3 drugstores on the east side and 1 drugstore on the north side, and then Whitson's dad put that big building in down on the south side, or the west side, and Tom, I think it was, gosh, I can't remember.
That's okay. That's
Somebody.
Okay. So all the shops and all the stores, all the
Yeah,
commerce was around the
there
courthouse.
was everything. They had shoe shops, they had dry goods, there were 2 dime stores. I know we all just loved to shop. There were ladies' shops everywhere. As Morris will tell you later on, he had his office up over Bill's
That's right.
dress shop.
That's right. That's right.
And Crawford Style Shop was downtown next to the Carter Drug. And Carter Drug had you caught the bus at Carter Drug. It was a bus station too.
Interesting.
And
Was Warrenburgers there?
Warrenburgers was across the street on the, well, it was the west side, but the northwest,
Right. Right.
you know, of the 105. Anyway,
So your new husband was in what business?
well, he had the funeral home in Conroe with his mother and dad, and we moved up, when we first got married, we moved up over the funeral home,
Which was where?
which was down on the 313 West Davis was the address. And the telephone number was 313. So everything was just, and the post office box was 313. Anyway, I went to work in their insurance department at the funeral home, and issuing policies, and I never did sell them until later on, much later on, when we moved out on the hill. But anyway, that's where we had our first child. He was upstairs with us in the apartment up there. And
As part of the business, you also had an ambulance?
we ran all the emergency ambulances. I never will forget one day, everybody was gone but me. And so we got an emergency call. So I took the emergency ambulance out. I went by and picked up Buddy Mark Everett.
Everett.
And we had to go clear over to Magnolia to pick up somebody to come back to the hospital. And I laughed because Buddy was driving. He insisted on it. And he ran the siren the whole way over there.
You like that, huh?
Wonder had burned up.
He thought that was great fun.
What was the normal charge for ambulance service?
$5.
Round trip, huh?
Round trip, $5.
$5.
And I know I laughed one day, somebody had a $10 insurance policy, And so they said, please charge $10 and give us, and when the insurance company pays, you give us back $5,
Interesting.
which we did.
As you and your husband and family were growing, what were the schools, hospitals? Give us an idea of what things were like in the early 50s.
Well, Tommy was born in 47, and right across the street from where my parents lived. And then David was born in 49 in that same hospital.
Mm.
And then Ricky was born in 51. And
So
right
First
there,
Street?
it was on First Street. And I can't remember the address, but...
Now we know where it is. And the
Yeah.
doctor, what were the doctors?
Well, we had Dr. Anderson was delivered Tommy,
Yeah.
and then Dr. Sadler delivered David and Ricky. And anyway, we didn't have a car when we were first married because you couldn't get one. It was just right after the war, and Leo had sold his because he thought he was going over to fight the Japanese.
Right.
And so anyhow, we had one car we borrowed from his mother and dad. Or I can remember we took the bus to Houston to buy him a set of golf clubs.
Yeah.
And it was just, everybody was in the same boat, so you never worried about anything. You just
Didn't lock any doors.
No, never locked the door. Even later on, when we had the funeral home out on the hill out there at 1401 North Fraser.
Why do you call it the hill?
Well, it was up the hill.
Up the hill. Okay.
It was up the
Okay.
hill.
Okay.
And that's it about. And then
I guess everything then was there was no air conditioning.
no air conditioning. No, we had a window unit, I think, in two of the bedrooms.
Bedrooms, right. Right.
And but I do remember when we were first married, and upstairs of the funeral home, we had an attic fan, but you always put your babies down on the floor to take a nap because it was so hot, and it was cooler on the floor.
Right. Right.
And but nobody seemed to mind. I think we were all adjusted to it.
We were climatized to the heat then,
Oh, and
because
when
we knew no different, didn't we?
No, we didn't have any idea that air conditioning
That's right.
was.
Right. That's right.
Unless you went to Houston and went in the department stores.
And they were air conditioned even
And they
in the
were
early
air
50s.
conditioned.
Okay.
I remember Leo, after the war, had the Air Scouts. And then, of course, he belonged to the Lions Club.
Right.
And I belonged to Beta Sigma Phi when it came to Conroe.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, when I was a gray lady, I
Yeah.
used to go into the hospital and rock the babies. That's where we worked. We bought our groceries from Wallace Lampton. You charged them. You paid the bill
That's right.
once a month.
And us kids could go charge too.
Yeah, well, I remember I'd get home with my groceries and I'd look in David and Tommy's hands and they'd have gum or candy or something.
That's right.
I'd have to call Wallace back and say, put 10 cents more on the bill. The kids pilfered.
A lot of
true.
the kids worked for Wallace, didn't they?
Yeah. Everybody loved Wallace.
Yeah, that was a Safeway.
That was Safeway.
Safeway.
Yeah.
That's right. So what kind of clubs in the 50s and 60s as Conroe grew a little bit, and what kind
Well-
of clubs and churches did you go to?
Well, we went to Sacred Heart, and my children were the first in the school at Sacred Heart. We helped organize that, and
Still in the same location.
still the same location.
Okay.
Of course, it's increased quite a bit. We
Right.
built a bigger school,
Right.
and church was wonderful. I belonged to the Catholic Daughters and worked for them. We used to have spaghetti suppers to raise money.
Right.
I'm telling you, we just had everybody would come to the spaghetti supper. You'd be back there dishing it up.
Interesting. Do you recall in that era who the sheriff, chief of police, county judge was?
Well, you know.
50s or 60s, and when you were a young lady?
Yeah, when we first came, it was Hoss Anderson was the
Hoss
sheriff.
Anderson.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
He was the county judge?
no, he was the sheriff.
Sheriff, okay.
And he was right. I think Guy Hooper was just before Hoss, wasn't he? And then Hoss, and then Hoss's wife took over after he died.
Mm.
And then, gosh, I've kind of lost track of who else.
Yeah, after that, they kind of run
After
together.
that,
don't they?
and politics was so much fun here. We'd have, they'd serve pie on the square and listen to the speakings, and everybody would come. You'd just have the best time. People would park there and right on the square, and they'd built a big thing for them to step on and talk to you. And it was just old home week when they were doing politics.
So at that time, Barbara, there was Highway 75 that
That
went from
was
Houston
it,
to Dallas.
and 105.
75, yeah, you're right.
2-lane, all
Two
the
lanes,
way
went
to
right
Houston.
through town.
Took an hour and a half to get to Houston, if on a good day.
Mm.
And if it wasn't a good day, it might take 2 hours.
And then Highway 105 was also 2 lanes.
Yes,
2 lanes.
2 lanes through. Leo used to tell the story that when he and his family came, that 105 was not through. It was, there
Not
was
through
a
to
big
Montgomery?
tree right in the middle of 105 and San Jacinto Street,
Interesting.
and didn't go down. Then I think at 2854 they had it, but not 105.
Okay.
Yeah.
When did you and Leo buy this home?
We bought this one in 1960.
1960. And what was out here then?
Well, there were
Wood?
quite a few houses.
Was
The Watsons lived across the street, and the Weissingers lived next door, and down the street the Tigners lived. There was nobody. The lot was empty next to us, and the Wilsons were across the street, and there was nothing over there where Passalak was are now.
Right.
And those were just woods. And then I do remember that Babe and Edna and Pitts built around the corner. And the first people I ever met when we moved here to Conroe were the Pittses, and because they lived a block from us out on, because we had lived
Right.
on San Jacinto when we first came. But anyway,
Besides your involvement in the church, there was someplace else everybody used to go. At some point, there was the
well, we had the
had a
ballad.
country club, didn't you?
Well, we always danced at the country club and played golf. There was not a swimming pool when we first came. The only swimming pool around was down across from the Baptist church. And we'd go
the
out
community
to
pool.
7 Mile Caney because that was a good place to swim. Just,
Was
we
that
had
out
a-
towards New Caney?
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, 7 Mile Caney's out the airport road.
Okay.
And but they had a big rope swing out there, and you'd swing out and drop in the water, and
Yeah,
it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So everybody in Conroe at that time, the couples belonged to which club?
Well, we all
Dance
had
club?
the Balladine Dance.
Balladine Dance
Club, and that was just wonderful. We had great big name bands
Yeah.
that would come and play, and then we'd have breakfast afterwards at the hotel.
Yeah. Everybody dress up.
Everybody was in finery. I mean, the men would wear tuxes and the ladies would all be in evening gowns, and it was really fancy and nice.
So as you were living in Conroe, You had 4 children.
Yes.
Tommy, David, Ricky, and Bobette.
Bobette was born in Brownsville because we had gone down there when Leo wasn't feeling really well.
Right.
Lived there for 3 years and then came back when his dad died.
So Conroe continued to grow. At some point, they put in a little lake.
Oh, they put in a swimming pool
Swimming
at the country
pools.
club,
Yeah.
which was wonderful. And no, we thoroughly enjoyed living in Conroe. Just we had a funeral home burned in
Right.
1951, I think, and we moved out on the hill to 1401 North Fraser, and Mr. Baker cut the funeral home in half and moved half each time.
Right.
He
Right.
put the top half became our apartments that we all lived in behind the funeral home, and the bottom half we added on and made the funeral home.
Then as your business grew, as Conroe grew, at some point, some big company came along
And
and made you an offer you couldn't refuse.
Well, that was Tommy. Tommy got the offer and he said, "Mother, don't screw this up." And I said, "I'm not about to, son, as long as I get what I want."
And what was that company?
SCI.
SCI.
So that's where we are now,
Yeah.
with SCI, and they have been a very good company to work for.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Okay.
Anything else you'd like to tell the next
Well,
generation?
I'm telling you, after Leo died, about 5 years later, we met. Morris and I saw each other again. His Margie had died, and we've met down on the square at the Catfish Festival.
That's right.
Yeah. Will and I my little grandson and I were sitting out on the curb eating corn on the cob, and Morris was doing the Lions Club bingo, and he came out and sat down with us. And I said, "Well, how are you doing, Morris?" Because Margie and I were in the same bridge club for 35 years. And he said, "Well," he said, "I'm doing fine, except I just hate to eat alone." I said, "Well, call me. I'll go eat with you." And sure enough, that's how it all started.
Well, there's the add to that is Harold, his son Tommy, somehow takes credit for putting them two together and says, "I've heard the story that Mom, go over there and talk to Morris." Do you remember that, Dad?
Yeah.
I don't think it was that way.
Well, Tommy takes credit
But
for
Tommy thinks so.
that. So y'all just celebrated your 20th anniversary?
Just celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary, and we've had the best time.
That's right.
Morris is wonderful. He just makes you laugh and doesn't let you worry about anything.
That's right. That's right. Okay. Well, on my left is my father. His name is Morris Bateman, and I'm his son, if you haven't grasped that already. He is 95 years old. He'll be 96 December the 12th. And I know a lot about your history.
Yeah,
So you
yeah.
you were born where, Dad?
In Athens, Texas,
Yeah.
in 1915.
December the
Yeah.
12th, 1950.
I don't remember that, but it was a long time ago. But,
I'm gonna stop y'all for a minute, and I'm gonna get Morris to move where his chair is actually touching yours.
Okay.
okay.
That good?
Okay, you move over just a little bit, Butch.
Okay.
I'm trying to get him to block off that back light. Come over a little bit more.
Oh, okay.
Morris.
Yeah.
Back that way, just about that much.
This way?
Okay, there you go.
I'm blocking that light.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
All right, so you were born in Athens, Texas, and
Yeah.
who are your parents?
P.P. Bateman and Minnie Murphy Bateman.
Right.
And my mother died when I was 12 years old, and we were living in Nacogdoches, Texas. And I went to grammar school in Nacogdoches, high school in Lufkin, and went to Nacogdoches College. And in the summers there, I decided, well, I'd see if I could find something to do, some work somewhere, and happened to be dating a young lady that was working for the telephone company, She said, come by the telephone office. And so I met with the manager there, Mr. Gene Shotwell, and I got a job in 1938 working for the Conroe Telephone Company
In Lufkin.
in Lufkin,
In
Texas.
Lufkin. You were working for the Lufkin phone.
Lufkin Telephone Company.
Right.
So I was an installer, installing phones there for years until the
Right.
war come along, and I volunteered for the Navy and had my Navy experience in Corpus Christi, Texas for 2.5 years, and was transferred to Bremerton, Washington for about 6 months, and had enough points, and the war was closing, and I was able to go back to Chicago and get discharged. But I had enjoyed my war service. It was, my wife went with me to everywhere I went. They'd buy me a ticket, they'd buy her a ticket, and so I had no problem with I was a dry land sailor, but never saw a ship. I was in the Naval Aviation Department and had an electrical inspector for all the planes that were repaired, that were brought into Corpus Christi, Texas after being wrecked and shot up and so forth. I was an electrical inspector on all electric motors, generators, starters, hydraulic pumps, and all the electric motors. Had to have my little stamp on it before it got back to the plane.
Did you take any test flights?
Yes, I took the experience test flights and drew what we call flight pay. That added a little bit to my $75 a month normal pay. So I enjoyed Corpus Christi. I lived ashore in the apartment there, and Margie and I, and she worked in the bookkeeping department. So we enjoyed our stay there, and I went on into Bremerton. We were there about 6 months, and never did get on board the ship. I transferred out of Corpus thinking I'd get to see some of the world, but got into Bremerton up there, and they found out my electrical experience and put me to work there. So I never did get on the ships or anything, but I came on back to Chicago and came back to Lufkin and back to the telephone office again. And
So you had a job when you came
yes,
back.
they kept me, had a job waiting for me. I was war chief, and
Okay.
by that time.
How big was Lufkin then? You remember?
Lufkin, I don't know the size of the population, but I know that.
How many phones?
Lufkin, I don't know how many we had over there, but I know how many we had when I moved to Conroe.
How long had you been with the company when you moved to Conroe?
Since 1938.
38.
Yeah.
And you moved to Conroe when?
In about 44.
48.
48.
48. Yeah.
48.
Yeah, I moved to Conroe in 48. And
So the Lufkin had bought, the Lufkin Telephone Company was privately owned.
Privately owned.
And they bought Conroe.
They owned Conroe Telephone Company.
They bought it from who?
They bought it from George Madeley, and they'd owned it, I guess, 50 years. It was 100-year-old here. About 4 years ago, it was a 100-year-old company owned by the Conroe Telephone, Lufkin Telephone Company. But I came here, we had 620 telephones. About half of them were cranks. It had operators, had 5 locals, 1 rural, and 1 long distance. And the long distance was a joke. We only had 6 lines to Houston. And to talk to anywhere in this world, you had to go over those 6 lines, 6 pairs of wires, to Houston to get out of here to go to the national worldwide telephone system. And that was a joke because people would call in and want a place to call to Houston or somewhere. We'd have to take their name and number and stack their tickets up. And by 10, 11 o'clock, we had a pretty good high pile of tickets waiting to get a line to Houston. Of course, Dave Nichols owned an automobile store here and parts and stuff, mufflers and stuff. So he wanted a place to call to Houston. We stacked him up with the rest of them. About 9:30 or so, we called him. Mr. Nichols, we're ready when you call to Houston. He said, blankety, blankety, blank, I've already been to Houston and got my muffler and brought it back. I don't need to call now. So we were in poor condition on long distance.
So the office was located where?
Over Miss Bell's dress shop on Simonton Street there, across from a drugstore or across from Everett's.
Right.
And that was the
Actually,
old telephone office. It's been there all the time.
It was
Since they bought it.
drugstore.
Brownlee drugstore
Brownlee
there.
drugstore.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was a
Had to
pitiful-
go up a flight of stairs
They
to
had
get
to go upstairs. And
to the office?
It was no air conditioning up there. We had fans, and I bought some ice and put it in a tub and set a fan behind the ice to blow out to the operators to try to cool them a little bit. finally, Mr. Dahl went in business selling Frigidaire air conditionings. So I bought an air conditioning system from him, and we put it in, and we were in seventh heaven. Had those girls. One of them was too hot, and one was too cold, and I couldn't get the temperature to please them. So
It's the same today.
it's the same way with everybody. But
So when you came here, what kind of resources did you have? How many trucks did you have working?
oh, in line 620.
No, trucks. How many vehicles?
Oh, none. Had no trucks whatsoever. And I bought my first truck, paid $1,200 from Mr. Fred Nutter, he's an international. Bought it and put my ladders and all and my tools on it. And Bob Elser was here working.
Right.
And so he had a truck, and I leased his truck for $100 a month. The telephone company paid me $100 a month for my truck. They didn't have enough money to buy a truck, so I bought one. $100 a month for these trucks, and we went to installing phones, and they were hard to come by. The board still was pretty tight, and didn't have any copper wires running very many places. Old telephone wires were on cross arms with pins and insulators. They'd get crossed up and wipe out the line, make it out of order. And those wires were always tangling up with something. And around town, I didn't have any wires. And a little 25 pair of cables, that means 2 wires for a customer, that's 25 customers. I had to beat that. I couldn't buy more wires, copper was still short. So I put 2 people on 1 pair of wires. Ring out there on one wire to the earth, it was J number, and the other wire to the earth was the W number, and that was J and W. And so then I got worse off than that, and I put 4 people to the line. Rang 20 cycle, 30 cycle, 40 cycle, and 50 cycle. So I separated the ringing, but still had 4 people to the line. And in the rural, we had 8 people to the line, and all the phones rang out there. Everybody was grabbing the phones when they shouldn't be, shorts and longs.
But they had different rings.
Different rings, and everybody know which
And all
ring.
these phones had crank.
Yeah,
Crank.
crank phone. Downtown, we had, you picked it up and waited for the operator to answer. A little light would come on the switchboard, and she'd plug in a cord and say, number please, or operator, and you'd say, give me number 44, and she'd put the other cord in 44 and pull back on a key and ring the phone at 44 until they answered. And that was the old manual switchboard system, and we kept that system, and it got pitiful to where they had 20 cords to a position, so with 5 positions, that was only that's about 100 cords that 100 people could talk at one time, and town grew and grew and grew, and it got to where you couldn't get the operator. She didn't have any more wires to plug in.
Yep.
So we decided right quick that we had changed the system to a dial. So we ordered a system from Stromberg Carlson, borrowed the money to do it, and put in a dial system and cut it in service in 1954.
Right.
And that's when we went to dial telephones, and it took us about a year to get all the phones in town, 620 of them, changed to dial phones instead of the regular phones with no dials on them.
That's when we went to the Pleasant.
We went to
Yeah.
Pleasant,
PL.
PL,
That's right,
PL,
that's right.
Pleasant.
PL.
Well, when you and Mom came here, where did y'all live?
Oh, we didn't have a home, and you couldn't rent any houses because they were all full from service people coming back.
This was 1948.
1948, and so they had,
No homes.
the company had bought a lot right next to town up there, about 2 blocks from the square, to put the telephone office on when we got ready to build one. And they had an old house on it, 12-foot ceilings, and it was about 3 foot off of the ground. Cold as a well digger in wintertime, and you and my wife would take you and go back to Lufkin. And in wintertime, it didn't want to freeze over here, so we couldn't heat that thing. But finally, we tore it down. I gave it to a man out in the oil field. Just told him come get it. It didn't cost him a nickel. He tore it down piece by piece and hauled it out in the oil field and put it back together. And then we built the telephone office there on Phillips Street and put in the dial service and cut it into use in the latter part of September of 1954.
So you built a house where?
We built a house on 603 Everett Street, and that was a street right beside Shipley's Donut,
Right.
between Fraser and Robinson. And it was a dirt street, and I remember going home in the evenings and the dust was flying everywhere, and I'd get a water hose and wet
No. The
wet
story
street
is you
down.
got me to get a water hose.
Yeah, we wet the street down. And
I remember out there with a water
water
hose.
hose straight. settling the dust on the street, and finally the city paved the street for me.
So in that area where Everett Street and 75, that was all woods?
All wood back in through there.
Right.
And they began to open. Kenneth Walker and Mr.
Wilburn.
No, forgotten who.
That's okay.
Did building those homes up here on all these streets on Thompson and Robinson, and all of them that started building houses up in there.
So Conroe was growing, starting to grow.
Just kept growing, and the people had to have places to live. And so every time they built a house, there was somebody ready to move in because the growth was there. But the big growth, the turnkey of the growth of Lufkin and the history behind the main was the lake. And of course, no one ever featured to have water in that land out there with Dan Madeley's cow pasture. I remember going out there with Eddie Steffens one time and looking at a lot up there off of what we call now the 830 road, and he said, for $3,000 you can buy this lot and there'll be water right out here. No, I'm not wasting my money on that. Nothing out there but cows. Well, I should have bought it.
So you switched over to, I'll go back to the phone company. So you switched over in 59?
54.
54. When did y'all buy Montgomery?
And before we, let me finish the story on that little deal, because 1980, the old mechanical switch that we had in the dial service, when you dial a 6, a mechanical arm moved 6 places. When you dial a 5, it'd move in 5 places, make a connection. So it was always hanging up and going crazy and breaking down. Finally, the traffic got so bad on it, we didn't have enough switches for the people to get to dial and get their number in the old dial system. So we had to buy a new, complete technological system, which is a computer. So in 1980, we bought the Northern Electric computer dial system and installed it and junked out that old mechanical switches with all those old gears and springs and ratchets that wouldn't cause trouble. So we changed in 1980 to what we call the dial computer system. And we had no more trouble. The lines were good, and I had plenty of lines to Houston.
That was the push buttons?
We had dial push buttons or dial 1 plus for long distance, no operators whatsoever. Our operators were in Houston. If you dial 0, you got an operator in Houston. But along those lines, we came along, and Montgomery was still an old magneto system. And we bought it out over there, and it was in a home with a mother and daughter, 2-position switchboard, and they'd take turns working that old crank system over in Montgomery. In fact, I have that switchboard in my den in my home.
That's right. You do.
And made a bar out of it. It's beautiful oak wood, and I took the old keys off and put veneer on it and made a nice bar out of it. But Montgomery had to be rebuilt from the pole to the cables to the wires, system and everything. We had to redo the whole system, but it's now a real modern telephone company over there. With good people live over in Montgomery. They're still keeping it a historical town, and because of the history behind it. All the people coming from Nacogdoches to San Antonio all stopped in Montgomery, and it's very historical.
So you worked in Conroe from 1948 to when did you retire?
I retired in 1985, and I worked 47 years with the Conroe Telephone Company. And of course, it was bought out by the TXU, Texas Utility Company, which is a light company. And they kept it for about 6 years, and they sold it out to Consolidated.
That's right.
Which was a Illinois company that owned a telephone company up there, and they bought it. TXU. TXU decided they needed to stay in the light business and not the telephone company that had headaches. That's so they sold it, and of course, I worked for the time they were sold. I had already retired. Right. But those were good companies. And
now, Barbara talked about the social life when she was a young lady and she was still married to Leo. What did you and Mom do in Conroe? Did y'all?
Oh yeah, I moved to River Plantation in
72.
about
72?
70s, somewhere along in there.
Yeah.
And sold my house to a dentist and moved to River Plantation. And we belonged to the River Plantation Country Club down there. And I didn't play golf, but we belonged as a social member, and they had parties down there, and of course the Bateman Club still had their dances in Conroe, and we belonged to all the clubs. And I belonged to the Lions Club. I've been in the Lions Club in Conroe 63 years, been a member that long. Been president, vice president, and all the different offices. I'm now the senior member.
That's
and,
right.
I remember when we met over in the Birch Hotel, there was about 35 of us with all the merchants and bankers and lawyers in Conroe. And now we have over 300 members meet every Wednesday out at the Airport Convention Center.
Right.
And our food's brought out to us and served
Yep.
in buffet style. And we have big membership, do a lot of good things for the community, scholarships. And we all help the community
Right.
Lions Club camp out in Kerrville. We help those people out there.
Okay. We heard about Barbara's involvement with the Catholic Church. Tell us a little bit about your involvement with your church.
Oh, I've been a member of the Methodist Church. I was born and raised in Nacogdoches. When I was over in that town and living there, I was a Baptist. My father was a Baptist, and he did what we call preaching on the side. He did a little preaching on Sundays at those country churches, and so I was always born and raised a Baptist. But when I got to married Barbara Margie, she was a Methodist, so I changed to Methodism and been Methodist ever since. I married her in 1939.
Right.
So we've been a Methodist ever since. But that Methodist church then was downtown where the
Right.
courthouse office complex is now.
That's right. Y'all
And-
moved.
And the old big building stayed there, and it was very small. We outgrew it, and I've seen times people come to the door and there wasn't a seat in the building, so they either stood up or went home. But it was had to
And you
buy
always gave up Christmas and Easter. You
Yeah.
said you'd let the people that come
Oh, yeah.
once a year
That's
to
right. That's right.
have
Yeah.
your seat.
my joke was, after one Sunday, I didn't have to go to church, 'cause I would leave my seat for somebody that never went except on Easter or Christmas.
There was another event that happened during those years every Christmas. And what was that? Was there a party at somebody's house every
Yeah,
Christmas?
we always used to have a open house
That's right. We did.
on Christmas Eve, and all our friends would come
That's
and
right.
bring their children. And I remember Babe Pitts used to come, and then he'd get all the kids and they'd go caroling.
Yep.
Yeah.
And but we always had such a good time on
There was
Christmas
a-
Eve.
I can even remember as a kid, there was a lot of people, including
Yeah.
the Batemans, who came to this house, and
Yeah.
the joy and the loving that spilled out here was just incredible.
Yeah, we always loved Christmas Eve. It was just great.
Yeah.
I remember Ricky was just a little boy, and we always had our Christmas tree after the party, because they always came from about 5 to 7 to our open house. And Ricky would go around with his watch, and he'd point out to everybody that
What
was
time it
still
was.
here that it was almost 7, and they had to
And-
think about leaving.
And what was your
Yeah.
world-renowned drink that you served?
Oh my!
Aren't you famous for a certain drink that you concoct every Christmas?
Oh, my eggnog.
Eggnog.
Yes,
Eggnog.
I make the best
Yeah,
eggnog.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's also the strongest.
Yeah,
It's pretty nice eggnog.
pretty nice. Good eggnog. good
That's right.
eggnog.
What-
Good eggnog.
what do y'all
Everybody
remember-
loves it. The only time we never had it was after Babe Pitts died, and Edna Ann asked me if she could have it instead.
Okay.
And she said, "You'll have to come do the eggnog."
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we all went over to the Pitts' house, and I was out in the kitchen making eggnog all evening.
Everybody loved Barbara's eggnog.
Yeah.
Still make it.
And still make it today.
Yeah,
Yes.
That's right.
Sure do.
I take it wherever we go for Christmas Eve.
That's right. That's right.
I bring the eggnog.
So from the 40s, when you both came here, through the last 60 years, you've seen Conroe grow and now just explode.
Yes,
Yeah.
and you know, we've been friends all these years. I
Yeah.
remember when you were just 2, we used to come to your birthday
right.
parties. We'd bring
That's right.
Tommy, and then David came along, and we've got pictures
That's
of,
right.
of
You
your
do,
birthday.
you do,
And
you do.
Tommy's birthday parties and David's, and so we have been friends forever.
That's
And then Margie and I belong to the same bridge club. Like I say, for 35 years, we'd play once a month and loved each other. We were the funny bridge club.
That's right. That's right.
As my maid used to say, she said, "When are you having the funny bunch over?"
Funny bunch, that was over.
Dad, do you recall anything
Yeah.
in your life here in Colorado, memorial, any event? It's obviously the phone company you dialed and then going digital.
I remember the bad times when we didn't have enough lines and people were hollering and fussing and calling the mayor up because they couldn't do this and couldn't do that. The telephone company didn't have no wires and couldn't get the operators and all. I remember one time that we had to call my boss over here from Lufkin, and we had a meeting with the mayor, and we were sitting at the old fire station downtown where the fire station was, right there on the square. And we were telling him all of our sorry stories why we couldn't get wire to do
Bill
this,
Newton.
couldn't build the lines and didn't have this and that. And he said, well, pulled out his checkbook and laid it on the table. How much you want for this place? I'll just take it off your hands and then I'll see if I can fix it up. Woo, we shook up. We said, we don't know this, Mr. Mayor. We just workers.
Yeah, Bill Newton.
Bill Newton's who the mayor was. And he could have bought it too, but he had oil wells all over this place out here.
Interesting, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Barbara, do you have anything you recall, that happened in your life that you'd like to pass on to the next generation?
Well, I tell you, passing things on, I try and keep my mouth shut.
Ah!
I just don't want to give advice to anybody because they're not going to pay any attention anyway. So I just try and love everybody.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you from the son's aspect of these two people that they've helped this community grow and prosper, both financially and spiritually. So, on behalf of the Heritage Museum, I'd like to thank my parents. I'd like to thank Sam Cable, our videographer, who I did not bring the piece of paper, of course, but I will later, for your time and talking about the history of Conroe and the